The cargo ship hummed through the endless dark of space, carrying medicine and food to the frontier world called Vareth Prime. And Sergeant Marcus Cole sat alone in the cockpit, thinking about nothing at all. He had been a soldier once, a medic who ran through fire to save dying men. But those days were behind him now, and he wanted them to stay there forever, buried deep where the screams could not reach him anymore. Vareth Prime was a strange world where two species lived side by side without truly understanding each other. And Marcus had grown to love its purple forests and orange skies during his 3 years as a supply runner. The Kavari were the native people here, tall, wolf-like creatures who walked on 2 legs and spoke in growls and barks that Marcus had slowly learned to understand. And they fascinated him even though they barely noticed him at all. They were warriors, proud and strong, with thick fur and sharp claws and teeth that could tear through metal. And they looked at humans the way a lion might look at a rabbit. Not with hatred, but with something close to pity. Softskins, they called the human settlers, and Marcus could not argue with the name because it was true enough, was it not? Humans had no claws and no fangs and no fur to protect them from the cold. And the Kavari could not understand why such weak creatures had spread across so many stars. Marcus did not mind their judgment because he had learned long ago that being underestimated was sometimes a gift. And he kept his head down and did his work and asked for nothing more than peace. The ship landed at a small Kavari village on the edge of the wilderness, and Marcus began unloading crates of supplies while the villagers watched him with their golden eyes. He worked alone because he preferred it that way, and he was almost finished when he heard a sound that made him stop and listen carefully. It was a whimper, small and afraid, coming from somewhere inside his ship. Marcus climbed back into the cargo hold and searched between the crates until he found the source of the sound, and his heart nearly broke at what he saw. A Kavari cub, no bigger than a human child of 5 years, was hiding in a dark corner with his arms wrapped around his knees and his ears pressed flat against his skull. The cub was thin, so thin that Marcus could see his ribs through his matted fur, and there were scars on his back that told a terrible story without any words at all. "Hey there, little one," Marcus said softly, kneeling down and making himself as small as possible. "Are you hungry?" The cub stared at him with eyes full of fear and confusion, and Marcus understood immediately what had happened here. Slavers had been raiding the frontier villages for months, taking Kavari cubs to sell in the outer markets, where exotic species fetched high prices. And this little one must have escaped somehow and hidden in the first safe place he could find. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a protein bar, holding it out slowly so the cub could see it was not a weapon. "My name is Marcus," he said in careful Kavari, his accent terrible, but his meaning clear. "And I'm not going to hurt you, I promise." The cub did not move for a long time, but hunger won out over fear eventually, and he crept forward to snatch the food from Marcus's hand. Marcus sat very still and watched him eat, and he felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in many years, something protective and fierce and impossible to ignore. "What is your name?" he asked when the cub had finished eating. "Ren," the cub whispered, and it was the first word he had spoken. Marcus smiled and nodded and said, "That is a good name, Ren, a strong name, and I think you are very brave for surviving all alone like this." He took Ren to the village elders and explained what he had found, and the elders listened with grave expressions on their furred faces. The cub's pack had been destroyed in a slaver raid 3 weeks ago. They told Marcus, and everyone had assumed that young Rin had been taken or killed. There were no relatives left to claim him, no pack to take him in, and the elders looked at each other with troubled eyes, because an orphan without a pack was a terrible burden in Kavari society. "I will take him," Marcus said, before he even knew the words were coming out of his mouth. "I will raise him as my own if you will allow it." The elders were shocked, and some of them laughed at the idea of a soft-skinned human raising a Kavari warrior. What can you teach him? One elder demanded. You have no claws and no fangs and no strength worth speaking of. So what kind of sire could you possibly be? Marcus looked at Rin, who was clinging to his leg now and trembling at all the loud voices, and he felt that fierce protective feeling grow even stronger in his chest. I can teach him kindness, Marcus said quietly, and patience and courage and how to survive when the world seems determined to destroy you. And maybe those things matter more than claws. The elders argued among themselves for a long time, but in the end they agreed because they had no better options and because they did not really believe the human would succeed anyway. Marcus took Rin home to his small house on the edge of the settlement, and he made up a bed with soft blankets and warm pillows and all the comfort he could provide. The months that followed were hard but beautiful, full of small victories and quiet moments that Marcus treasured more than gold. Rin learned to trust him slowly, and then to love him. And one day, he looked up at Marcus with those golden eyes and called him sire in the Kivari tongue. Marcus had to turn away so the cub would not see the tears running down his face. An elder watched them playing together one evening, watched the human throw a ball for the cub to chase and catch, and he turned to another Kivari with a shake of his head. The human is soft, he said with something like pity in his voice. And what will the cub learn from such weakness? The other elder nodded in agreement, and neither of them noticed the way Marcus watched Rin with eyes that held more steel than softness. Neither of them understood what a human father would do to protect his child. But they would learn soon enough, would they not? 6 months had passed since Marcus brought Rin home, and the little house on the edge of the wilderness had become a place of warmth and laughter and love. Rin had grown stronger and healthier, his fur now thick and shiny, his eyes bright with curiosity about everything in the world around him. He followed Marcus everywhere, asking questions about human customs and human food and human stories. And Marcus answered every question with patience and care. Why do humans not have fur? Rin asked one morning while they ate breakfast together. Because we come from a warm world, Marcus explained, and we learn to make clothes instead of growing our own coats. That seems very inefficient, Rin said seriously, and Marcus laughed so hard that he nearly choked on his food. The other Kivari cubs in the village were not so curious or kind, and they often mocked Rin for having a human sire. Your father has no claws, they would say with cruel smiles, and no fangs and no strength, so how will he ever teach you to be a warrior? Rin would bristle with anger at these words, but Marcus had taught him to control his temper and walk away from fights that did not matter. Let them talk, Marcus would say gently, because words cannot hurt us unless we let them, and we know the truth of what we are to each other. Still, Rin wished he could show them somehow, wished he could prove that his human sire was worth more than all their mockery. He did not know that he would get his wish very soon in the worst possible way. The Varax Compact had not forgotten about the Kivari cub who escaped their slave ship, and their spies had been searching for months. They were reptilian creatures, cold and cruel, with scales like armor and eyes like black stones, and they made their living by capturing and selling people across the galaxy. When they learned that a valuable Kivari cub was living with a single human on the frontier of Vareth Prime, they saw an easy target and an easy profit. 6 Varax raiders landed their ship in the forest one night, armed with plasma rifles and stun grenades and confidence that came from years of easy victories. The human would be no problem at all, they told each other, just a soft-skinned weakling who would probably surrender the cub without a fight. And if he did fight, well, what could one human do against 6 trained slavers? Rin was already in bed when he heard the first strange sound outside, a hiss of voices speaking a language he did not understand. Marcus was beside him in an instant, his hand gentle on the cub's shoulder, but his eyes hard and focused in a way Rin had never seen before. Listen to me carefully, Marcus said, in a voice that was calm but left no room for argument. I need you to go to the cellar and seal the door from the inside. And you must not come out until I knock 3 times. Do you understand?" Rin wanted to argue, wanted to stay and fight beside his sire, but something in Marcus's face made him obey without question. "Promise me," Marcus said as he guided Rin toward the cellar hatch. "Promise me you will stay hidden no matter what you hear." "I promise," Rin whispered, and then he was climbing down into the darkness and pulling the heavy door shut above his head. The cellar was cold and black and terrifying, and Rin pressed himself into a corner and tried not to shake. He could hear sound from above, muffled by the floor, but still clear enough to make his heart pound with fear. There was a crash of breaking glass, and then voices shouting in that harsh alien language, and then a sound that might have been furniture being thrown across the room. Rin found a crack in the floorboards and pressed his eye against it, desperate to see what was happening to his sire. He saw shadows moving fast, saw flashes of light that might have been weapons firing, and heard Marcus's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. But it was not the voice Rin knew, not the gentle, patient voice that told bedtime stories and sang silly songs. This voice was cold and hard and terrifying, and it spoke words that Rin could not understand but knew were promises of violence. Something heavy fell to the floor with a thump that shook dust from the ceiling, and then there was screaming, horrible screaming that went on until it suddenly stopped. Rin clamped his paws over his ears and squeezed his eyes shut and tried to remember how to breathe. The sounds continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Crashes and shouts and terrible wet noises that Rin did not want to think about. And then, slowly, everything went quiet. Rin waited in the darkness, too afraid to move, too afraid to hope, counting his own heartbeats because it was the only thing he could do. 100 beats passed, and then 200, and the silence stretched on like a held breath. Finally, just when Rin thought he might go mad from waiting, he heard footsteps above him, slow and heavy and uneven. 3 knocks came on the cellar door, their secret signal, and Marcus's voice followed, strained and rough, but still recognizable. "It is safe now, little one," Marcus said, and Rin heard something in those words that made his throat tight with worry. "You can come out." Rin pushed open the heavy door and climbed up into the main room of the house, and what he saw there would stay with him for the rest of his life. The room was destroyed, furniture smashed and walls scorched and everything covered in a dark liquid that Rin's nose told him was blood. Bodies lay scattered across the floor and spilling out into the yard. 6 Varax raiders who had come to take him away, now still and silent and very clearly dead. One had been killed with a kitchen knife that Rin recognized, still sticking out of his chest. Another had his neck bent at an angle that should have been impossible. A third was slumped against the wall, with what looked like a broken chair leg driven through his eye. And in the middle of all this carnage sat Marcus, his back against the wall, trying to bandage his own wounds with hands that would not stop shaking. There was blood everywhere on him, some of it his own and some of it belonging to the creatures who had tried to take his son. "Sire!" Rin cried out, rushing to Marcus's side and pressing his small paws against the wounds as if he could stop the bleeding by will alone. Marcus smiled weakly, and the expression was so strange on his pale and bloody face that Rin felt tears begin to burn in his eyes. "I am okay," Marcus said softly. "Just scratches. Nothing to worry about." But Rin could see that this was a lie, could see the deep cuts and the burns and the way Marcus's breathing came too fast and too shallow. He looked again at the bodies of the slavers, warriors twice the size of his human sire, armed with weapons that should have made this fight impossible. And yet here they lay, dead and defeated, killed by a single soft-skinned human with no claws and no fangs. Rin touched the blood on Marcus's chest, feeling the warmth of it soak into his fur, and a question formed in his mind that he did not fully understand. "Does the foe know you belong to us?" he asked in a small, serious voice. Marcus blinked at him in confusion, not understanding what the cub meant. But before Rin could explain, a shadow fell across the doorway, and both of them looked up to see a Kavari elder standing frozen on the threshold. The elder had come to investigate the sounds of battle, expecting to find a human corpse and a stolen cub. Instead, he found 6 dead Varax raiders and 1 bloody but living human who had torn through them like a storm. The expression on the elder's face shifted from shock to something that looked almost like fear, and Rin felt a fierce pride swell in his chest. Let them call his sire weak now. The elder's name was Vorath, and he had lived for 60 winters and seen more battles than he could count, but nothing had prepared him for the sight before his eyes. 6 Varax raiders lay dead in and around the small human dwelling, their bodies broken and torn by violence that seemed impossible. These were not weak creatures who had been killed here, but trained warriors with armor and weapons and years of experience in dealing death. And the one who had killed them was sitting against the wall bleeding from a dozen wounds, a soft-skinned human who should not have survived the first 10 seconds of such a fight. Vorath stepped carefully over the bodies and knelt beside Marcus, his golden eyes wide with questions he did not know how to ask. "Ow," was all he managed to say. Marcus shook his head and winced at the pain the movement caused, and his voice was tired when he spoke. "They threatened my son," he said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps to him it did. Rin had not moved from his sire's side, his small paws still pressed against the worst of the wounds, his eyes fierce with determination. "You need a healer," Vorath said, rising to his feet. "I will bring one from the village." "Thank you," Marcus whispered, and his eyes began to close. "Sire!" Rin cried out, shaking him gently. "You must stay awake, please." Marcus forced his eyes open again and managed a weak smile for his son. "I am not going anywhere, little one," he promised. "I just need to rest for a moment." Vorath ran to the village faster than he had run in 20 years, and he brought back not just a healer, but half the settlement, all of them desperate to see if the rumors were true. They found Marcus being tended by the healer, while Rin watched over him like a tiny guardian, growling at anyone who came too close. The crowd stared at the bodies of the Varax raiders and whispered among themselves, unable to believe what they were seeing. "What human did this?" asked a young warrior named Keth, his voice thick with disbelief. "One human," Vorath confirmed, "with no weapons except what he found in his own home, and no armor except his own soft skin." The healer worked quickly, cleaning and stitching the wounds while Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness. When she was finished, she looked up at Vorath with an expression of confusion. "He should be dead," she said quietly. "These wounds should have killed him long before the fight was over, but somehow he kept going." "Humans are strange creatures," Vorath murmured, watching Marcus sleep. 3 days passed before Marcus was strong enough to stand, and during those 3 days Rin refused to leave his side for more than a few minutes at a time. The cub brought him food and water and told him stories to help pass the long hours, and Marcus listened with a smile on his face, even when he was too tired to respond. Word of what had happened spread through all the Kavari settlements like fire through dry grass, and soon everyone was talking about the human who had killed 6 Varax raiders to protect a single cub. The tribal council summoned Marcus to give testimony as soon as he was well enough to travel, and he came before them leaning on a walking stick with Rin at his side. The great hall was filled with warriors and elders, all of them staring at Marcus with eyes that held a new kind of respect. The head elder, an ancient Kavari named Shara with silver fur and wise eyes, spoke first. "Tell us what happened that night," she commanded, "and do not leave out any details." Marcus told the story simply and without pride, describing how he had sent Rin to hide and then waited for the raiders to enter his home. "I knew I could not beat them in a fair fight," he admitted, "so I made sure the fight would not be fair." He had killed Galites and used his knowledge of the house to move in darkness, striking from shadows and disappearing before they could react. The first one died before he knew I was there, Marcus said, and the second one died while he was still looking for me, and after that, they began to panic. The elders listened in fascination as he described using furniture as weapons, turning the raiders' own tools against them, and never stopping even when their plasma fire burned his flesh. But how? Demanded an elder named Grath, who had always been loudest in his contempt for humans. How did you keep fighting with such wounds? How did you move so fast and hit so hard? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was strange and distant. They threatened my son, he said again, and after that, I do not remember choosing to do anything. I just did what needed to be done. A human woman stepped forward from the crowd, a scholar named Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had been living among the Kevari to study their culture. If I may, she said with a bow to the elders, I can explain what happened to Sergeant Cole that night. Shara nodded her permission, and Elena turned to address the entire hall. Humans have something we call the protective response, she began, a biological reaction that occurs when someone we love is in danger. She explained how human bodies could flood with chemicals that blocked pain and increased strength, how human minds could shut down everything except a drive to protect. We call it many names, Elena continued. Hysterical strength or protective rage or the mother bear instinct. But they all describe the same thing. And all humans can do this? Asked an elder in a voice that sounded almost worried. All of them, Elena confirmed. Every parent who has ever lifted a vehicle off a trapped child. Every sibling who has fought against impossible odds to save their family. Every friend who has run into fire to rescue someone they love. The hall was silent as the Kevari absorbed this information, and Marcus saw understanding dawn in their golden eyes. When you threaten what a human loves, Elena said quietly, you are not fighting a soft-skinned creature anymore. You are fighting something that does not know how to stop. Something that will tear itself apart to keep fighting until the threat is gone. Rin stepped forward then, standing tall before the assembled elders, his small voice carrying through the great hall. This is why I asked my question, he said. The question I asked when I touched the blood on his chest. Shara leaned forward with interest on her ancient face. What question, young one? I asked if the phone knows that he belongs to us, Rin said proudly. Because in our way, if someone harms one who belongs to a pack, the whole pack will hunt them forever, and I wanted to know if the Varaks understand that my sire is under our protection. A murmur ran through the crowd, and Marcus felt his eyes grow wet with emotion. But now I understand something else, Rin continued. Now I understand that maybe the question should go the other way. Maybe the foe should know that we belong to him. He turned to look at Marcus with fierce love in his golden eyes. Because if this is what humans do for those they love, then maybe being loved by a human is the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. The elders were silent for a long moment, and then old Shara began to laugh, a deep rumbling sound of genuine joy. The cub speaks wisdom beyond his years, she declared, and I think we have all learned something important today. Vara stepped forward with a grave expression on his face. There is another matter we must discuss, he said. The Varaks Compact will not let this insult go unanswered. They will come for revenge against the human and against us for sheltering him. The mood in the hall shifted as the warriors began to murmur about coming war. But Marcus raised his head and met Vareth's eyes without fear. How many of them are there? He asked quietly, and something in his voice made even the oldest warrior shiver. The tribal council met every day for a week after Marcus gave his testimony, and the debates were long and heated and full of fear. The Varaks Compact was not a small threat that could be ignored or wished away, but a powerful organization with hundreds of ships and thousands of warriors spread across a dozen star systems. They made their fortune by stealing people and selling them as slaves, and they had never let anyone escape their revenge. "They will send an army," warned Grath, who had stopped mocking humans and now seemed almost afraid of them. "They will burn our villages and take our cubs and make us pay for the 6 we killed." "The human killed," corrected Vorth quietly, "and perhaps that is our answer." All eyes turned to him, and he continued with a thoughtful expression on his face. "The Varax do not know what they are dealing with," he said. "They think humans are weak because humans look weak, but we have seen the truth now." "One human killed 6 raiders," said Shara slowly, "but there are thousands of Varax in the compact." "Then we must not wait for them to come to us," Varth replied. "We must strike first and cut off the head of the snake." The warriors in the hall began to growl with approval, but Shara raised a paw for silence. "Even if we wanted to attack, we do not know where their bases are or how to reach them without being detected." "I do," said a voice from the back of the hall, and everyone turned to see Marcus standing in the doorway. He was still healing, still moving slowly with bandages visible under his clothes, but his eyes were clear and sharp. "You know the location of the Varax bases?" Shara asked in surprise. Marcus walked forward through the crowd until he stood before the council, and his voice was calm when he spoke. "I was not always a supply runner and a healer of small wounds," he said. "Before I came to Verith Prime, I served in the Terran Special Forces for 15 years. A murmur of shock ran through the hall, and Marcus continued without pause. "I ran operations against the Varax Compact twice during my service, and I know their tactics and their weaknesses and the location of their regional command post." Grath stepped forward with suspicion in his eyes. "If you were a warrior, why did you hide it from us all this time?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he answered his voice was heavy with old pain. "Because I was tired of killing," he said simply. "I came here to find peace and to forget the things I had done, and I thought I could leave that part of myself behind forever." He looked toward the doorway where Rin had appeared, watching with wide, worried eyes. "But then they threatened my son," Marcus continued. "And I remembered that some things are worth fighting for. Some things are worth killing for. And if the Varax want war, then I will give them a war they will never forget." The hall erupted in howls of approval, and even the most skeptical elders were moved by the fire in the human's eyes. "What do you propose?" Shara asked when the noise had died down. Marcus turned to face the assembled warriors, and his voice took on a tone of command that made them all stand straighter. "The Varax Regional Command Post is 3 days' travel from here, hidden in an asteroid field that they think is impossible to navigate," he explained. "They keep maybe 200 warriors there at any time, along with their regional commander and all their records and communications equipment." 200 is too many," Grath objected. "Even our best warriors could not overcome such numbers." "We do not need to overcome them," Marcus replied with a cold smile. "We just need to break them." He explained his plan in detail, a strategy of stealth and terror that made even the hardened Kevari warriors uneasy. They would not attack in force, but in shadow, moving through the base like ghosts, taking out key targets and disappearing before the Varax could respond. "Cut the communications first," Marcus said. "Then the power, then the commanders. And by the time they realize what is happening, it will be too late to call for help." "This is not how Kevari fight," protested a young warrior named Keth. "We face our enemies with honor, claw to claw." Marcus turned to look at him with eyes that had seen too much death to care about honor. "Honor is for enemies who deserve it," he said quietly. "The Varax take children from their families and sell them like animals. They burned villages and murdered parents while their cubs watched and screamed." His voice grew harder with every word. "They came to my home to steal my son, and they would have killed me without a second thought. So do not speak to me of honor when we are dealing with monsters." Keth looked away, unable to meet the human's gaze. Shara rose from her seat, and walked down to stand before Marcus, her ancient eyes searching his face. "You ask us to trust you," she said, "to follow a human into battle against our enemies, and that is not a small thing." "I know," Marcus acknowledged, "and I would not ask if there was another way. But the Varaks will come for us eventually, and I would rather meet them on my terms than theirs." The old elder was silent for a long moment, and then she nodded slowly. "I believe you," she said, "and I will support your plan before the council." With Shar's endorsement, the vote was almost unanimous, and preparations for the raid began immediately. Marcus worked with the Kavari warriors day and night, teaching them the human way of war, the tactics of stealth and surprise that his species had perfected over thousands of years. The young warriors were eager students, fascinated by techniques that seemed almost like cheating compared to their traditional methods. "You do not fight your enemy," one of them said with dawning understanding. "You break him before the fight even begins." "Now you understand," Marcus replied with approval. Rin watched all of this with a mixture of pride and worry, seeing a side of his sire that he had never imagined existed. One night he crept into Marcus's room and found him sitting alone in the dark, staring at nothing. "Sire?" Rin said softly, climbing into Marcus's lap. "Are you afraid?" Marcus wrapped his arms around his son and held him close. "Yes," he admitted. "I am afraid of many things. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of what I might have to do. Afraid of becoming the man I used to be." Rin pressed his small face against Marcus's chest and listened to the steady beat of his human heart. "Then why are you doing this?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Because fear is not a reason to do nothing," he said, "and because no one else will ever threaten you while I am alive to stop them." The night before the raid, 12 Kavari warriors gathered at the edge of the village, the best fighters from all the nearby settlements who had volunteered for this mission. They were young and strong and fierce, but they looked at Marcus with a new kind of respect now, the respect of students for a master. Vorath came to see them off, and he gripped Marcus's arm in the warrior's gesture of farewell. "Bring them home safe," the elder said, "and make the Varaks regret the day they came to our world." Marcus nodded and turned to his warriors, his borrowed pack, his new family. "Remember what I taught you," he said. "Stay silent, stay smart, and trust each other, and we will come home with victory in our claws." The warriors howled their approval, and Rin watched from the shadows as his sire led them into the darkness. "Come back to me," the cub whispered to the stars. "Please come back to me." The journey through space took 3 days, and during that time, Marcus barely slept, spending every waking hour reviewing plans and preparing equipment and answering the warriors' questions. The Kavari had never seen a human in command before, and they were surprised by how naturally he took to the role. He remembered every name, knew every strength and weakness, and gave orders with a quiet confidence that made them want to obey. "You are different from before," Keth observed as they neared the asteroid field. "When you lived in the village, you seemed soft and gentle, but now you seem like something else entirely." Marcus did not answer for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was tired. "I am the same person," he said. "I just learned to hide this part of myself because I did not want to be this anymore. I wanted to be the father Rin deserved, not the killer I used to be." "But you are both," Keth said with sudden understanding, "and that is what makes you dangerous." The asteroid field was a maze of tumbling rocks and hidden sensors, but Marcus guided their ship through with the skill of someone who had done this before. They landed on a small moon near the center of the field, close enough to see the Varak station, but far enough to avoid detection. "We go in tonight," Marcus told his warriors as they gathered around him. "We hit them fast and hard, and we do not stop until the job is done. Are you ready?" 12 voices answered as one, a howl of determination that echoed across the barren moonscape. They crossed to the station in small pods, drifting silent through the darkness like shadows given form. Marcus led the first team through an airlock that the Varax had forgotten to guard properly, and within minutes, they were inside the enemy base. The station was huge, a sprawling complex of corridors and chambers carved into the heart of a massive asteroid. Hundreds of Varax moved through its halls, going about their business without any idea of the death that had come for them. Marcus signaled his warriors to spread out, each team moving to their assigned target with practiced precision. The first objective was the communications array, a vital system that would prevent the Varax from calling for reinforcements. Keth and his team reached it without being seen, and they destroyed it with charges that had been designed for exactly this purpose. The explosion was small but devastating, and suddenly the Varax were cut off from the rest of their organization. Panic began to spread through the station as alarms blared and warriors scrambled to find the source of the attack. But by then, Marcus and his team had already moved on to the next target, the main power generator that kept the station running. 2 Varax guards stood at the entrance, and they died before they even knew someone was there. Marcus moved through them like wind through grass, his blade silent and certain, and his Kevari warriors followed with growing awe. "How does he do that?" one of them whispered to another. "He makes no sound at all." The power generator was a massive machine that hummed with energy, and Marcus placed his charges with careful precision. When they detonated, the entire station went dark, and the screaming began. The Varax were not used to fighting in darkness, but the Kevari could see perfectly with their enhanced eyes, and Marcus had trained himself long ago to fight blind. They moved through the station like a nightmare given form, striking from shadows and vanishing before their enemies could react. Warriors who had terrorized countless worlds found themselves hunted in their own home, and the terror they had always inflicted on others was now turned against them. Marcus led the way to the command center, where he knew the regional commander would be trying to restore order. The doors were locked and guarded by the best warriors the station had left, but that only delayed the inevitable by a few minutes. When the doors finally fell, Marcus stepped into the command center to find a single Varax standing behind a desk with fear in his cold reptilian eyes. This was Commander Thrask, the one who had ordered the raid on Vareth Prime, the one who had sent slavers to steal Kevari cubs and sell them like cargo. "Wait," Thrask said, holding up his clawed hands. "We can make a deal. I have wealth and resources and connections that could make you powerful beyond imagination." Marcus walked forward slowly, his blade still dripping with the blood of Thrask's guards. "I do not want wealth," he said quietly. "I do not want resources. I do not want power." "Then what do you want?" Thrask demanded, backing against the wall. Marcus stopped in front of him, and his eyes were the eyes of something ancient and terrible. "I want you to answer one question," he said. "Were you the one who ordered the raid on Vareth Prime? The raid that orphaned Kevari cubs and tried to steal my son?" Thrask's silence was answer enough. The Kevari warriors looked away as Marcus did what needed to be done, and when it was over they stood in the ruins of the Varax command center with victory in their hands. "Is it finished?" Keth asked quietly. "It is finished," Marcus confirmed. "The Compact will send no more raiders to Vareth Prime, not after they learn what happened here." They left the station burning behind them, a warning to anyone else who might think of threatening the Kevari or the humans who lived among them. The journey home seemed shorter than the journey out, and Marcus spent most of it sleeping, exhausted in ways that went deeper than physical tiredness. He dreamed of Rin, of the life they would build together now that the threat was gone, of quiet days and peaceful nights and the sound of his son's laughter. When their ship finally landed at the village, Marcus was the first one out, and he barely made it 3 steps before a small furry body slammed into his legs. "Sire," Rin cried, wrapping his arms around Marcus and holding on with all his strength. "You came back." Marcus knelt down and gathered his son into his arms, and for a long moment he could not speak past the lump in his throat. "I will always come back to you," he finally managed to say. "Always." The village celebrated for 3 days, and the warriors told stories of what they had seen, of how the human had led them through the darkness and taught them a new way to fight. The elders met in council one final time, and this time their decision was unanimous. Marcus was called before them with Rin at his side, and old Shara rose to address them both. "You came to us as a stranger," she said, "a soft-skinned human that we did not understand, but you have proven yourself in ways that none of us expected." She stepped forward and placed a carved medallion around Marcus's neck, the symbol of the tribe. "From this day forward, you are one of us," she declared. "The first human ever granted this honor, and your sons will carry your name with pride." Marcus looked down at Rin, who was practically glowing with joy, and he smiled. "Thank you," he said to the elders. "I will try to be worthy of this gift." Later that night, as they walked home together under the alien stars, Rin looked up at his sire with a question in his golden eyes. "Do you remember what I asked you?" he said, "after the fight when you were bleeding?" Marcus nodded slowly. "You asked if the foe knew that I belonged to you." "And now I know the answer," Rin said with a fierce smile. "Now everyone knows. The Kevari and the Varax and the whole galaxy knows that you belong to us." Marcus laughed and ruffled the fur on his son's head. "And they know something else too," he said. "What?" Marcus smiled and pulled Rin close. "They know that you belong to me," he said softly, "and that I will never let anyone hurt you. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." In the years that followed, a new saying spread among the Kevari, a warning that was shared with other species across the stars. "Never harm what a human loves," they would say, "for humans are not a warrior species. They are something far more dangerous. They are a protecting species, and they do not stop." And somewhere on Vareth Prime, an old human and his Kevari son lived in peace, knowing that the galaxy had finally learned the truth about the soft-skinned creatures from Earth. They were not weak at all. They were just saving their strength for when it truly mattered.